Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series where I cover certain things related to employment here in Australia. For those of you who are just joining for the first time and you missed out on the first video, first of all, I am going to point you to the description box where you can access a link to the first part of the video where I covered the employment contract types here in Australia. This is the second part where I get to talk about taxation and how taxes work in Australia. And in the third part, which I did say was going to be the bonus, the icing or the cherry on top of the cake, that is where I am going to cover salary sacrificing or salary packaging. So again, for those of you who missed out on the first part, I did leave a little teaser on what salary sacrificing is all about. It's in relation to how to reduce the tax you pay on your income. Okay, so make sure you watch all 3 of these videos. I am sure it will be helpful, especially if you've wondered about some of these things in relation to taking up employment here in Australia. But first, disclaimers. I love my disclaimers, okay? I don't want to set the wrong expectations. I am not an accountant. I am not a tax agent. I am not a financial expert of any kind. It might actually surprise some of you to know that I am one of those people whose brains just go blank when confronted with numbers. So if you popped a spreadsheet with numbers in front of me, my brain scrambles. All right, and why I am saying this is just so that you know that I may not have the right technical language to talk about numbers, to talk about taxes. I may not have the right terminology, and I am just going to explain this according to my own understanding, okay? So please don't judge me too harshly. And of course, I always have my notes to help me along as I go. So pardon me if I am looking this way or that way. I have my laptop there. I have my little notebook here. I would like to start by just throwing out a few things. You can consider this to be general knowledge surrounding the subject of taxation. First of all, what does the financial year in Australia look like? The financial year runs from the 1st of July all the way into the following year to the 30th of June. By that, it would mean that we are still in the 2023-2024 financial year. Another thing that is really important for you to know is that you could be classified an Australian resident for tax purposes or not. And it has nothing to do with your immigration status, visa status. It has nothing to do with whether you're on a temporary visa or a permanent visa, okay? You are considered an Australian resident for tax purposes if you live in Australia. So your physical address is here in Australia. The organization you work for is also in Australia. You receive your salary here, you pay your taxes to the Australian government. Then in that case, you are considered an Australian resident for tax purposes. And I guess the flip side of that coin would be people who are not considered Australian residents for tax purposes. Now, the interesting thing is that this might be people who are actually Australian citizens by birth or by naturalization, but the fact that they don't receive their salaries here or maybe their taxes don't come back to the Australian government, then they are not considered Australian residents for tax purposes. If you are an Australian resident for tax purposes, it is highly recommended that you have something called a TFN, which is a tax file number, okay, as soon as you start your employment or even before then, okay? It is advised that you arrange to get your tax file number before you take up any employment here in Australia. And that will help to make sure that you will be taxed at the right rate. Otherwise, you might be taxed higher. So having said all of that, let's get into the meat of the discussion. This is where we're going to be talking about taxation rates. Before I say anything else, please keep in mind that Australian taxes apply on a sliding progressive scale. In very simple terms, the more you earn, the more you're taxed. And I don't think this is anything unique to Australia. I believe that most other developed countries also operate on the same kind of taxation policy. I guess this is where I answered the question I asked in the first part about whether casual employees, as a result of the 25% leave loading that applies to their base hourly rates, will be taxed higher. And the short answer is yes, because the 25% leave loading is considered as taxable income. Let's follow along with the table that will be popping up on the screen. Looking at that table, you can see that taxable income is captured in different income brackets. The very first income bracket, which happens to be the lowest, is for people who earn between $0 and $18,200 per annum. So if you fall within that category, then you are actually still within the tax-free threshold. Nothing will be deducted from your income as tax. A step above that income bracket will be for anyone earning from $18,201 all the way up to $45,000. For this, a marginal tax rate of 19% applies. Every dollar you earn above $18,200 will be taxed at 19 cents. That's just what it means. A step above that takes you into the income bracket of people who earn between $45,001 all the way up to $120,000. And this is where things begin to look a bit different. You can see that there are actually two different figures that apply here. The fixed amount of $5,092 is considered your average tax rate. But on top of that, you're also going to be taxed at a marginal rate of 32.5%. So it means that 32.5 cents will go out of every dollar you earn above $45,000. And if we go into the next income bracket for those earning between 120,001 Australian dollars all the way up to $180,000, that income bracket has a tax rate of 26,467 Australian dollars, but on top of that, a 37% marginal tax rate will also apply. Yeah. And it goes on until the very last income bracket, which is for people earning from $180,001 and no upper limit. There's no upper limit on this income bracket. The marginal tax rate caps at 45% for people who fall within that income bracket, and the average tax rate is $51,667. I don't know if I have done a good enough job explaining this, but I hope that makes sense. Another thing to keep in mind is that even within the same income bracket, right, the marginal tax rate still applies on a sliding scale. So it means that if you're at the bottom of that income bracket, you're not going to be taxed as high as someone who is at the very top end of that income bracket. Okay, so that is where the marginal tax rate applies. It's a sliding tax rate that caps at the percentage that applies to the people within that income bracket. I hope that makes sense. Okay. I did warn you that I didn't have the language. Anyways, that is how taxation works in Australia. Let me give an example. Let's say, for example, that I was earning $90,000. It means that I would fall somewhere in the income bracket of people who earn between $45,001 to $120,000. $5,092 is a fixed amount that will be deducted as tax from my income, but on top of that, there is also going to be a 32.5% marginal rate that will apply for every dollar I earn above $45,000. Another thing that I almost forgot to mention in relation to what other tax goes out of your income will be the Medicare levy surcharge. The Medicare levy goes towards servicing Australia's health insurance scheme, and this is the health insurance scheme that covers all permanent residents and Australian citizens, right? So the Medicare levy surcharge also comes out of your taxable income, and it is applied on a sliding scale as well from 1%, and it caps at 2%. So depending on how much you earn, the higher you earn, a bigger percentage will apply to your taxable income. But like I said, the cap is at 2%. Let's move on to the next thing, which will be about tax returns. A reminder here for you to like the video if you haven't already done so. So we lodge our tax returns after the end of the financial year. Anytime after the 30th of June, you're free to lodge your tax returns. However, there's two deadlines. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but yeah, if I remember, I'll put it up on the screen. And these are deadlines that apply to when you should lodge your tax returns. The first one is in October. I think it's the 30th of October or the 31st of October. If you're going to be lodging your tax returns yourself, then you need to have done it by the 30th of October. However, if you are using a tax agent, I think the deadline is extended into sometime in the following year. Okay, so that's just another general knowledge thing about tax returns here in Australia. Now, when it comes to tax returns, I'm sure that some of you would have heard about claims that you can make, deductions that you can claim on your tax, right? I'm just going to give you a few examples, but of course, there is a more extensive list of things on the ATO website. So if you would like to see more information on that, I will encourage you to look at the ATO website. I will leave a link in the description. So you can make deductions and claims on work-related expenses that have come out of your own pocket. For instance, if you have used your own personal car for work-related activities, you can claim back some of those expenses for fuel or for servicing, just as long as you have your receipts and you have some kind of proof to evidence the claim you're making, okay, which is very important, because the last thing you want to end up with is a fine from the ATO on the basis of you not providing evidence for any claim you make, okay? Other work-related expenses might apply to things like uniforms and the laundry expenses to maintain your work uniforms. Work-related expenses could also be any trips you have made in relation to your work which came out of your own pockets. Again, keep your receipts. Someone asked me in the previous video about whether international students can make a claim for their school fees during their tax lodgement. And for this one, I feel like that's a really technical question that only a tax agent can accurately answer. So I would encourage that you speak to a tax agent for that one. However, I do know that if you attend a course, you attend a seminar or some kind of professional development in line with your work, and while you're still employed in that job or in that field of work, okay, if you attend any of these things and you pay out of pocket, you can claim some of that money back. You can also make claims on work from home related expenses, and this is something that started at the beginning of COVID. So you can make claims on any work related expenses accrued from working from home. For instance, your internet, power bills, office equipment. And just on that note as well, you can also make claims for work related equipment. For instance, if I wanted to buy a laptop for work purposes, I could claim back some of that expense during tax time. All right, so these are just a few examples of the things that you can claim back. But as I said earlier, you can access a more comprehensive list on the ATO website. So please do yourself a favor and check out that list. Another question I remember that someone asked me was in relation to the 482 visa and whether 482 visa holders are taxed higher just on the basis of their visa status. And to the best of my understanding, again, I could be wrong, and this is where you might want to speak to a tax agent, but maybe also a migration agent. But to the best of my understanding, the explanation I gave in relation to being an Australian resident for tax purposes will also apply to 482 visa holders. So as long as you live in Australia, you work here, you remit your taxes here, you should be considered an Australian resident for tax purposes, even if you are on a 482 visa. So that will be my answer. I hope this video has been helpful at the end of the day, and don't forget to give me a thumbs up before you go. I hope I did a good job explaining, but of course, if you have any other questions or you have any comments to add to the things I have discussed here, please leave it in the comment section. I will see you again in the third part. Don't forget to come back to check out the video about salary sacrificing. Bye-bye and see you.